2 takeaways. I suck at this, but I want to get better.
Today I'm sitting down with Miesha Tate. Miesha's a Strikeforce champion in MMA. She's a UFC champion in MMA. And most recently, I'm not sure if more importantly, she won Celebrity Big Brother 3.
That's right. Yeah, I wouldn't say more importantly, but I would say equally, if not more challenging to get through that. Yeah, it was 28 days of entire isolation. We're in the house with 10 other celebrity house guests. And the design of the show is basically, you've got to form these teams, but as you go, week by week, you're eliminating, people are voting out different players. And so you're forced at some point to start cannibalizing your own team. And it is designed to make you absolutely mad. It's a pressure cooker. And it was a learning experience, though. I definitely miss my kids and my family a lot. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. And that's it in a nutshell. But I won, so I guess it was worth it.
Oh, I never watched the show, honestly, but I'm sure. I get the psychological pressure of that. I'd feel terrible that you're making decisions against allies in my life. I wouldn't.
It was terrible, and it's designed to it promote lying. There are no rules, right? So it's designed to promote lying. It's designed to promote backstabbing. It's designed to promote drama and cattiness, and that's how a lot of the shows really go, at least from what I saw. I didn't get to see a lot of it because I only had 2 weeks notice before I was on the show, so I try to binge watch the first 2 seasons of Celebrity Big Brother. But you know what I did do? I set some records for competition wins. So I won 4 head of household competitions and 2 of the veto competitions, which is more than anybody has ever done before. I'm like,
that's gangster.
That's what I do, I guess. This is compete. So at least that much I excelled in.
No, you are quite a competitor. So, in a more honest area of life, I think it's difficult to. I have this thought in my head. You tell me you may or may not agree, but if you're a high-level sports competitor, you don't get to lie to yourself too much. You have to. It's an area where a person has to be very honest with themselves and the key people around them. Of what are your assets and liabilities, or what are your greatest strengths, and how to best utilize and showcase that, and what are some of the weaknesses to work on. So I think about that in my life of business, that the more you lie to yourself, or tell yourself you have talents that you don't actually have, that's a recipe for disaster in both areas.
And yet people are experts at that.
They are.
Isn't that incredible? Sometimes I'm like, are you actually buying your own lie right now? I mean, how do you do that? But people have surprised me a lot in that department. You're absolutely right. I think as a professional athlete, you have to be brutally honest with yourself at times. Like, if you suck, you suck. If you suck that day, you suck that day. And if you're great that day, you've got to also be willing to admit you were great that day. Sometimes I think athletes are more likely to fail to admit they were great than fail to admit they suck. But I think it's important to acknowledge both.
I saw a study on this. It said that one of the greatest determinants of achievement in life is, it's number 1, your IQ, that your ability to process information well, and number 2, conscientiousness, and which I would characterize as ability to give yourself, sometimes unflattering feedback, or have the thought of, like, how could I do that better? What else could I do? So even if you're doing very well at something, the people that are top performers, they tend to have, their brain works well. They're able to process information rapidly and accurately. Right. But also they have that conscientiousness to say, what could I do even better next time? And that's helped me a lot in my life. But I imagine that there's a fine line between a healthy version of that, of giving yourself, feedback of, like, I could do better with this, I could do better than that, I got to fill in this void before my next event, versus being a little too down on oneself and saying, I'm world champion, but I suck at everything, or something, Yeah,
I think it's a balance of that constructive feedback, and that can be positive, and it can be, I guess, when I say constructive, it doesn't necessarily mean negative, it's just honest, Yeah, I think so.
I got to interview a lot of champions that, and from not only from fighting, but all walks of life. Maybe 40 or so interviews at this point of this nature, and it's people that won Super Bowls, or there were a lot of few Olympic people, a lot of fighters, some from boxing, most from UFC, and I always ask them some of the gritty stories from the background that nobody lands with that on a mountain with a belt around their waist. Something like that doesn't happen accidentally. So there's probably there's a rough grind, and some early life lesson that happened there, or some early life catalyst. What was that for you that got you excited that like I need to beat up some of the toughest women in the world?
Oh my gosh, you know what? I don't even know if it was ever a clear thought like that. It was more like that I just wasn't afraid to take a risk. So these things kept kind of falling into my lap. And I wonder if my story is just very unique in that sense, or if this happens to a lot of people and some people just say no, and they don't realize that what that opportunity would have been if they would have just tried and where it maybe would have led them. However, I'm just somebody who typically says yes, even if it's the craziest, doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why would you do that? But I'm like, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, I'm just going to try it and see how it goes. So I was in high school, had my first step in the direction towards fighting. Had no idea at the time that this would amount to that. But I was sitting in an English class with my best friend, Sharon, and she said, I think I'm going to go out for wrestling. And I said, okay. She's like, do you want to go out for wrestling with me? I was like, okay. I don't know, but I wanted to play a sport more than I didn't. And I can't play basketball. I think we all have a sport that we know is just not for us. I am not cut out for basketball. So I went home and I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what do you think? And she said, I think this is crazy, and I definitely think we should not tell your dad. But I'm going to, it's like, keep it a secret. That's the deal. I said, deal. And she said, I don't think you're going to like it, but I'm not going to tell you can't do it. She was always like pro, I could do anything. So she wasn't going to handcuff me, which I really appreciate. Thank you, Mom. I went out for wrestling the next day.
Shout out to Miesha's mom. I know you're watching.
I went out for wrestling the next day, and it was the hardest thing either one of us had done. I remember just like staring at her after the practice in the locker room like, what was that? What did we just do? Like, they kicked our butts. They did not want us there. It was physically exhausting. They didn't teach us anything. There was no advice. It was just kind of like they run the gauntlet, and they were hoping we didn't show up the next day. But I was very intrigued because I'm like, well, 2 takeaways. I suck at this, but I want to get better. And that was really what it was, is just taking this leap of just trying something that was so far out of the element that people didn't even think, there was no women's wrestling team. Let me clarify that too. So, we were wrestling with the guys. And we didn't even know if women would be allowed to do that. So even just trying out, or the idea of trying out, which obviously I have to give Sharon the credit for that, but getting out there and doing it was, the other part of it. And that, after 4 years of wrestling on the high school team, and I won the Coaches Award, which is given out to one athlete. We probably had about 40 guys or so, 30 to 40, and 2 girls. But at one point, my junior year, I was the only female to wrestle on our team. And that award still is up there with anything that I've ever won in my entire life, because it was very symbolic in that how you can change people's perception. The first day that I was there, the first wrestling season that I was there, I wasn't really far from embraced on the team. But by my senior year, with the work ethic that I had shown and the consistency I had shown, and I wasn't a prize wrestler. I didn't win most matches, if any, really, against the guys. But they valued something in me, I guess, that I brought to the table. And so I did. I won the Coaches Award, and that was really, really meant a lot to me. And then moving forward in college, or do you have a question? Or am I running along too long?
No.
Yeah. If you have something to ask me, go ahead, because I can divide this up into sections.
I was going to mention that when I chatted with Kamaru Usman, his fighting career also started in wrestling, and he told me when he first went to wrestling, he was about 5'2". He had about 102 pounds, I believe he said. And he said there was a girl on the team that used to beat his ass.
Yep.
And he was so frustrated by that that was the catalyst, that he thought he was going to go one time and just check it out. And he said that was the catalyst that really made him like, I got to go back. Like, I at least got to hold my own against this female,
Oh, that's incredible.
So that was a humorous catalyst that, later on 6-time world champion and counting. So it's just another humorous wrestling story that came to mind. But
I didn't know that.
Continue.
I enjoy that. I'm going to have to ask tomorrow about that a little bit, because there's definitely some boys that I kicked their butts too, and I would love to take credit if they, went on to do something great because of that.
Some of them just cried at home.
Right. Some of them just quit and never came back. But, some can become world champions because of it. So I went to college. MMA kind of fell into my lap. I had, so my parents put me in an all-girls dorm, which I'm like, okay, well, I don't know how that really helps mom and dad, but they were like, we're gonna stick you in the all-girls dorm and on this campus. And anyways, my next door roommate, like next door neighbor, I guess you could say, was into karate, and she had looked up a mixed martial arts program there at the college, and she was like, you gotta come with me. And I'm like, I don't think so. That was probably, I was like, I don't think so, because I don't do karate, I never did, and I'm just, it seems really out of my element. So she went, and then the next day she's like, you gotta come on, there's a bunch of wrestlers, and you're gonna love it. I was like, okay, fine. So I went with her, and I started learning about jiu-jitsu. I started learning about choke holds and arm bars, and my mind was immediately blown. I'm like, from wrestling to choking people, I'm like, okay, I think I could make that leap. That doesn't seem too crazy. But they were like, well, do you wanna fight? And I was like, absolutely not. Never in a million years would I want to get hit in the face or hit anybody in the face. I'm not a violent person. I don't need to, fight people. And I still thought it was, violence driven at that point, right? As most people did. This was back in 2006. So I had never really even heard of the UFC at that point. I mean, I don't recall ever being a fan of it. I think I'd maybe my dad had it on at points, and I was just kind of aware that it existed. But so I went, and I enjoyed the first practice, and I kept going back, and eventually it was like 3 weeks after training, I took my first fight. I just literally jumped right in. I remember I went to an amateur fight event. I saw all the fights, and my heart rate was up. I was like exhilarated. This is amazing. I would love to do that. In the back of my mind, I think I was saying that, and then they made an announcement over the microphone as the fights were ending. They said, hey, in 3 weeks we're going to have an all-female fight card, if there's any women in the audience who would like to sign up. So I just made my way down there, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, and I signed up. So I don't know, it's, I guess, where chance meets somebody willing to take the chance. Yeah.
There's another quick perceptual shift that took longer to get the perceptual shift in the wrestling team early on to get your award.
Yep.
You went from absolutely no fighting. 3 weeks later, you're signing up.
So fast. It was insane. I can't believe it. But I blame a lot of it on just being naive to what it even was. When I thought of fighting, I'm like, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to fight. Like, it just seemed like you had to be angry. That was my ignorant perception on what it actually was. And still to this day, it's one of the biggest myths is not the right word about the sport. I don't know if a myth is exactly right, but maybe misperception that people have, that we have to be mad to do what we do. And
I've talked to numerous, there's only 80, 90 champions ever at UFC, and I've chatted with maybe 20 of them. And most of them are college educated, hardworking, very smart, very, if they weren't doing this, they'd be doing something else, upwardly mobile, and it might even pay them more money.
Yeah.
And it might even pay them more money. So it's certainly not been my experience with the people at the top of that organization, the top athletes, or I wouldn't characterize it all as like anger-driven people,
Yeah, and I agree. So thank you for saying that. But a lot of people still think for some reason that I guess they think that if they were to fight, that they would have to be that way, because that's the only way that they would get into that situation. But what I try to describe to people is that it's no different than playing tennis or soccer, or maybe any other, maybe continue on with any other one-on-one sport. It just it's like playing chess with your body. It's very much about strategy, and I don't find myself harnessing any type of anger in order to get in there and perform.
I'll give you an embarrassing tidbit of my first jiu-jitsu lesson was with our friend Jake Shields, and he introduced me to like a front guillotine choke. And when I tried to fight that a little longer than I should have and wasn't successful, then my throat hurt every day for about 15 days, and then it only hurt sometimes for the next 15 days or so after that. But within 5 weeks, it felt, pretty normal.
Pretty normal, yeah.
Pretty
I mean,
normal.
eventually it gets back. We actually learn tech. I don't think anybody teaches this, actually. You know what? It's a good point. But But there are some strategies to like flexing your neck and throat, and I realize that usually when I demonstrate choke holds on people who have never been choked, they're just completely relaxed, and they usually end up like coughing and like spewing, and I'm like, this is so different than choking somebody who knows, who's going to be like, and like flexing your throat and everything so that it doesn't get crushed in.
Sure.
But absolutely, it's just a craft, right? I mean, just like anything, you have those experiences. And the first time I got choked, it was a very similar experience. So I was like, what just happened? So I just got my windpipe folded in 20 billion different directions, it feels like.
Wrapping up the Real Estate Riches mentoring course from Derek, I wanted to give you a few takeaways of what I got from the course. So the first thing is a lot of clarity. Going into this course, I had zero knowledge around real estate. Going through the 8 weeks, and it's intense. Every single week you're doing at least 20 hours of work. Just work, learning, having the right guidance, having the questions answered from Derek. That's something that this course really did for me, is develop a lot of clarity. So coming out of the course, the plan for me now is to go ahead and start implementing and start looking into actually developing that long-term wealth with the information, with the clarity that I did get from this program from Derek, and having that nuanced advice that you'd not really find anywhere else. So if you're thinking about doing something like this and learn the deep details of every aspect of real estate investing, from getting loans to understanding property investment types and so on and so forth, I highly recommend you do not pass on this. Okay, the money alone, the knowledge that you get far outweighs any kind of money that you would invest into something like this, just because of how much compounded progress you will get from the gains and the knowledge that you get from the program.